Welcome to Empowered Kids TV FireSide Talks. I'm so excited that you're live with us tonight. Tonight, we're talking all about what does it actually mean to be an empowered parent. Stay with us. Welcome to Empowered Kids TV Fireside. This is where we come and we take our capes off, get surrounded by support and love in this beautiful, non-judgmental community. And we get coaches coming in each and every week to help push our awareness and our insight and give us some tools to really connect deeply with our kids. Today we're talking about what does it mean to be an empowered parent? Now, we talk about empowered kids all the time, but what's the parent like that raises an empowered kid? That's the conversation tonight. And joining us is an amazing coach. Kim Muench is a JAI Institute for Parenting coach and the founder of Real Life Parent Guide. She's a mom of 5. I have 2 and I struggle. She has 5, who is passionate about helping moms who are in the midst of parenting teens and young adults. And I'm excited to have Kim join us tonight. Kim, welcome to FireSide Talks.
Hi, Nicole. I'm so happy to be here with you and to talk about what it means to be an empowered parent. I think this will be a great discussion.
Well, let's start right there in terms of what does that mean to you to be an empowered parent?
Okay, to me, it means 2 things, really. It means a lot of things, but 2 main things. The first is an empowered parent takes good care of themselves. And that we can launch into that in a few minutes. But the other thing is, so takes good care of themselves and also continues to educate themselves on the developmental stage that their child is in at the moment. You mentioned that I have 5 kids. So there was a point at which, and my kids at this point are 15 to 33. However, there was a point at which I had a newborn and a high schooler and everything in between. So, to stay educated on all of those stages was and is a lot to ask of people. But I think it's really important that we tend to do a lot of education for ourselves before the baby's born, or even when our kids are little. But as they go through elementary school, middle school, and high school, we tend to forget, first of all, parenting really changes and shifts during that time. What it looks like to parent needs to evolve during that phase. And if we don't know that, we're going to still try and parent our kids as if they are little. And that isn't going to go well. That's kind of where we end up with our power struggles. So the 2 things I think are really important to be an empowered parent is to take really good care of yourself so that you are emotionally available to your kids, and also to continue to educate yourself on what your child's development is at the time that you're in.
There's a few things in there. First off, I want to say you do not look like you can have a 33-year-old. Like, we need to talk about some tips about that. But secondly, I think the thing that stood out for me there, that it felt like was that during pregnancy, like we all are so proactive in planning what the early stages of parenthood would be like. We follow the parenting journey, what size the baby is, like we should be compare it to fruit, and we're all really eager. And obviously we prep the home, we do our nesting, right? But it's all very proactive. And then the baby comes and then we switch to being reactive. Like, how do I handle the fact that I can't sleep? And how do I handle these tantrums? And it just goes on from stage to stage all the way to teenage years. And I think the truth bomb is that as parents, we need to accept that none of it is a surprise. It's no surprise that our kids are going to go through these phases. It's also no surprise the challenges that we'll have in each phase. So we have the opportunity to be proactive and prepare for each stage so that we're better. And I love that you're saying a big part of that is also how we care for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. It is. It absolutely is. And I just want to say, how the people talk about all the time, children don't come with manuals. Well, there's a million parenting books written. They actually do have many manuals, but the most important manual is the one that you're writing on your children every single day. And you have to think about it as not, oh my God, I've got to be perfect, but no, how can I maybe even just improve a little bit over yesterday or do something differently. Parenting is a practice. And you're writing on your children and your grandchildren when you're parenting.
Mm.
So that's not necessarily to say we can't make mistakes. It is maybe at the forefront of our minds, though, to think about how we can model the adults we want our kids to become.
I love that. And I love even like I've never thought about my grandkids while in my parenting journey, but I love that thought. So I usually talk, I have two boys, and I usually talk to them. My mom says you're putting too much pressure on them, but I talk to them not about how they're showing up today, but the fact that what they do today is practice for who they'll be tomorrow. So we talk about that in our moments when it's heated, about not the fact that you have to reach for good emotional tools, but why you should want to reach for them. Because I don't want my kids to reach simply because I'm saying you should do better. I want them to have that inner drive. And so I ask, what kind of husband do you want to be? What kind of dad do you want to be? And for me, I don't see it as pressure. I just say it and I leave it. I leave it, let it land and let them think about it. And usually I see in a few minutes the motivation for them to have corrective action for any relationship repair that they might be responsible for, but also to try to do better the next time. And I feel like that gives them a sense of what for me is the only type of discipline you have, which is self-discipline, where they're regulating themselves and they're motivated to make the change.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I want to go back a little bit for a minute to talking about what it means to take good care of yourself as you parent. So in order to be an empowered parent, we need to take good care of ourselves. What does that really mean? I think on a surface level, it means finding those activities that nourish your soul on a daily basis in a physical, an emotional, and a spiritual realm. For example, I walk 6 miles a day. And that to me is it's actually a combination of physical and mental health for me to do that every single day. And maybe somebody doesn't have that kind of time, but it's really asking yourself what it is that helps me to be a patient and calm parent. The other part about that, so we're talking about a surface level, take good care of yourself by doing the things. The other thing I want to talk about is we all have a childhood story. We all have an experience that we had growing up, and we tend to parent from that experience unless we look at it and make conscious choices to do differently. Now, that doesn't mean everything our parents did, was we should throw out the window. It just means we need to look back and kind of think about those times in our lives when maybe our parents were not at their best, or they were distracted, or we didn't have our own emotional needs met. And how could that experience have been different or better for us, and be that parent that our parents couldn't be in that moment, right? I mean, just so limiting beliefs, when we look at that, or when we look at our childhood story, we tend to have taken on beliefs about ourselves that aren't necessarily true. I'm going to give you an example from my own life, because I think it's a really good example. So when I was about 6 years old, I have two younger brothers. One was 4 and one was 2 at the time. We were 2 years apart. And we had a neighbor who had a really amazing swing set in her backyard. My dad was in charge of us for the evening, and my brothers and I wanted to go play on the swing set. So he was outside talking to a neighbor while my brother and I, we went over to the swing set. And my 4-year-old brother and I were going to have a competition, a swing competition, to see who could go highest. And my littlest brother was playing in the sandbox nearby. As my brother and I are going really at it, out of, like really competing with each other to go fast, my little brother decides that he wants to swing, and he proceeds to come closer to me. And I see this coming, and I scream at him to stop, to not come in front of the swing. Well, he's 2, he's not thinking, and I can't stop in time. So I end up hitting him, and I end up hitting him on the way back, right? Well, my dad suddenly, comes out of this conversation with a neighbor, and my brother is crying, and I am obviously upset. So he comes over to tend to my brother, and he immediately tells me, I'm trying to tell him what happened, and he immediately shoos me off to my room because he is angry and upset. So I go to my room, and I'm feeling horrible about the situation. A little while later, my mom came home, kind of took over my brother, and my dad came upstairs to talk to me. And I tried to tell him what happened, and he really shut me down. He really was very angry. And looking back on it, I believe that he probably felt he should have been more aware of what we were doing as opposed to being involved in the conversation. And he projected that onto me in the form of anger. But it is in that moment that I took on the belief that I wasn't worthy of being heard. So I lived many years not knowing, it was unconscious, first of all, to me, but it would come out when my kids wouldn't listen to me as I was parenting, right? The surface level feeling when you're operating from an unconscious belief, the surface level feeling may be anger, disappointment, frustration with your kid for not listening to you, but there's always a level that's deeper. And for me, until I figured that out and started practicing a different belief, it came from the belief that my kids didn't listen to me, they were disrespecting me, and I wasn't worthy of being heard. Which, when I did the work, of course I'm worthy of being heard. But again, it's in that situation that I talk about with my dad could have happened any day in any parenting situation. I mean, I didn't have a traumatic childhood, but even in these everyday events, we sometimes have a perceived experience that turns into a belief for us that can play out in all areas of our life, not just our parenting. So one of the other ways that I think parents can become empowered is to really look at the beliefs that they have taken on and to work towards, if there are unconscious limiting beliefs that their kids are triggering in them, because we know that that takes place. Nothing triggers us more than our kids' behavior. To look at those and to work towards beliefs that are going to better serve not only your relationship to yourself, but to your children. So I know I said a lot there, but
that's okay. Let's digest a little bit, because I think this is juicy on a couple different levels. First of all, I think it's important for us to recognize that as adults, all of us have a version of that belief. There is some version of that, right? Because of the parenting dynamic that we had when we were growing up. So mine is slightly twisted to yours, and it was what I have to say isn't important enough to the people that I love. Not just important enough to everybody, but to the people that I love. And it was the same thing. I was trying to get my parents' attention, my mom's attention, and she was busy going through the to-do list, exhausted at the end of the day. And what I had to say, she didn't recognize was really important to me. I can't even remember what it was. But so that's important, I think, for us all to recognize. So as we start to look at ourselves and really kind of shine the light on self-awareness, for us to recognize that each of us may have a version of that belief that we need to kind of uncover and put some healing on. But the second thing is for parents to understand and really take away that based on brain development, kids under 7 really don't have a choice but to internalize what's happening into their environment from a me perspective. So it's not that dad was angry or dad was feeling guilty because he wasn't listening or paying attention. It is something with me. And that's brain development. So there's no going around that other than really paying attention. And the truth is, as a parent, there's so much attention you can pay. Right. And there's that space, I think, that probably makes us, that's the humanness in us, where some of those beliefs will slip in. So I think there's two things in this conversation I'd like us to bring about. One, as a parent, how do we then use our triggers? Because that's what you're saying. Our triggers are showing us where those beliefs are. How do we use our triggers to find the healing And then how do we model what that healing looks like so our kids can develop their own practice to deal with what we've passed on?
I think it's important to say, just before we go into that, is that we parents are also, between the ages of 0 and 7, our kids' emotional regulators. They look to us to identify, to not only identify what their feelings are, but how to deal with feelings. They look to us in terms of how we deal with stress, we deal with happiness, we deal with sadness, all the things. So we are their model for their emotional life initially. And now I just forgot what you were gonna.
That's okay. So we're talking about how do we use those triggers to then
Yes.
identify the belief, and then how do we do the healing work?
Okay, I think the first step is, when you're being triggered, to be aware you're being triggered. And maybe just listening to this conversation will help someone the next time they're in a tense situation with their child to just take a moment and say, what's going on for me right now? How is it feeling in my body? How, and that takes awareness. First of all, awareness and intention to work to really take the idea of limiting beliefs and kids triggering them and wanting to learn more and do more with it. That you can't if you're going to take the time and raise awareness, there has to be intention behind it. So once you are slow down and you can again pinpoint what it feels, what it's feeling like in your body when you're in the middle of a situation with your child who is triggering you, and asking yourself, what is this about? Yes, again, I'm sure it's in the moment, it's the frustration, maybe it's disappointment, anger, overwhelm, but what else is going on in that moment for you? What could be, you have to really, again, take the time to make a connection, maybe not back to a specific event in your childhood, because just because I remember that specific event doesn't mean, it would come from a specific event. But it's about a feeling, like it's about a knowing that this is something deeper than just this moment, that your child is giving you an opportunity to grow yourself up through. And what it looks like in terms of, I think the second part of the statement that you made was, how do we model this for our children? I think that we can do that by, first of all, working through it ourselves, asking ourselves if this belief that I have is serving me, is serving my relationship with my child. What would better serve me? So there's steps involved. And that's something that I do with parents, when I'm coaching them. But to model what it looks like to come from a different belief, and depending on your child's age, I don't think you could explain this to a young child, because they're not going to care, and it's going to go over their head. However, just you practicing, working on being less triggered, understanding that a large majority of the time, children aren't coming from a place of wanting to manipulate you. They're being who they are, and it's other stuff in our background that is being triggered in the situation that we're in. So awareness is first, for sure.
I love that, Kim. I think so I'll share a little bit about my story. So when my kids were little, I didn't have the openness with my own emotional journey. So outside of the bedroom, I was smiling. That's when I was happy. And then when I was angry or I was really sad, that was in the bedroom, door closed, and I would only walk out after freshening up in my bathroom, making sure I was happy with my smile on. Then I walk back out. And so for most of their younger life, my kids only saw mommy happy. Until one day I realized, like I said to them, we were having a conversation and I was like, how do you get yourself back to your happy? And my son didn't intellectually understand what I was talking about because I hadn't shown him. I hadn't shown him that you could move from being sad back to happy, from angry back to happy. And that was like, okay, a real light bulb moment for me. And I started to live full out for my kids to see all of me. This last, I would say the last 18 months has been really, really hard. And so they've seen more of an emotional roller coaster from me than they probably would have ever dreamed that they would have seen. But I thought that it was really important because I know that they're also going through this emotional roller coaster through this phase, that they see that I'm doing it. And I'm making space, I think, for the first time in my life to be sad when I am sad. Like I'm not rushing out of my sadness. And I declare it, mommy feels sad today. And my sons go, is there anything we can do? Do you need anything? My son goes, do you need a cup of tea? But
Oh,
but then I know, okay, so I've declared it and I've made space. And so they get to see that's the day I ramp up my self-care. I might just, and self-care could be just sitting with a book, watching some I'm always preparing for Empowered Kids, and that for me is still it lights me up. So that's the love. So I'm probably watching some interviews while I'm preparing, but it's all about showing them that that self-care takes me back to my happy place, and then I keep going. And so I think for me that's how we can model, because you're right, you can't teach a 4 and a 5-year-old how to do that with anything else but watching your behavior.
yes, I think that's absolutely it. And naming those emotions that you're having and allowing them. Sometimes as parents, we're uncomfortable with our kids' big feelings. And so we tend to either ignore or rush them through it. And then they just stuff it down and they haven't learned to define what that is, and that they can actually express it and go through it. And we can teach them. I'm actually working with a mom at the moment, and her son is 15, and he's quite angry at the world. And I suggested that they get a punching bag because he's been using the walls of the house and or the furniture. So we talked about how it's okay that he's angry. It's about showing him acceptable ways to have that feeling and giving him some buy-in. So we actually talked about, not just bringing home a punching bag one day and being like, here, this is where you're going to take your anger out, because kids have to have some buy-in. So we talked about, looking at different punching bags, looking at that as an option, and where would we put a couple options in the house of where you could put it so that he feels comfortable going to that space and expressing his anger as opposed to somewhere else in the house, right? But I think that it's really important that we do I love that you made a decision to move from having those more negative feelings or whatever, unhappy feelings in your room, to showing your kids, because this is how they learn from us.
Absolutely.
And it holds us it holds us a little bit accountable as to how we're processing our own emotions. We're not, it's prevalent to not process our stress well at times. Adults sometimes, react irresponsibly with their stress, but it isn't helpful to our kids to model that for them.
Absolutely.
So making a conscious decision, right? Making a conscious
It is.
decision.
Yeah, I think, and I say this to parents all the time, right? The changes in your family, like you can literally dream up the best possible family dynamic you can ever have. You know that dream we all have when we get pregnant? Oh, it's going to be like this, and we're running through fields and we're spinning around with our kids, right? You can actually have the family of your dream if you're intentional and you create the habits to support it. That's really what it is. And so but it has to start with that intention each phase of the way. I want to talk a little bit about what holds us back, from kind of stepping into that empowered space as parents, maybe unconsciously, that we could bring some light to.
I want to say, I don't know if all parents understand or know this, but our kids, actually, let me just back up. It's not just our kids, everyone, no matter what their age, has 6 basic emotional needs that we get met through our behavior. And those needs are the need for acceptance, for affection, for appreciation. We need attention, autonomy to be our individual selves, and the need for connection. So when you are in a situation, again, I want to raise awareness for being intentional, and B, just becoming more aware about what's going on beneath the surface level of whatever altercation you might be in with your kids. Instead of getting angry, immediately going to anger, it also is about getting curious about what's going on for your child in the situation. What this behavior, this misbehavior that they're having, what could they really be looking for from you in that moment? Oh, you froze.
Can you hear me?
Yes. I was like, you froze.
Let's go over those triggers again. The 6 triggers.
Oh, the 6 triggers are the 6 top triggers for parents are whining,
Yep.
not listening, disrespect, the words "I hate you," physically being hurt by a child physically hurting, and siblings fighting. That's it. Like those things are the things that most
push us,
bring a rise out of you. Yes.
Yeah. I can feel it. Like I've been in all of those, and I can feel it just as you say it. But I think it's important. One of the things that you're touching on that I want parents to take away from this conversation is that it's also really important to recognize there's a difference between an emotion and a feeling. And Brendan Bouchard has a beautiful explanation for this that I would share. So, an emotion is what I would describe as almost it happens in like nanoseconds that it feels almost automatic, right? It's in a response to your environment, it's chemicals flooding your body, physiological changes happening, and it feels instantaneous. But a feeling is when we wrap our story in it. So I'm angry because you are not listening to me. You are ignoring me. And so we now wrap our story and our belief system into that emotion, and it goes on. And the thing that I learned that I think was a real aha for me is that a feeling can last a lifetime. You can carry a feeling with you for the rest of your life. You can be bitter, you can be angry, yeah, for the rest of your life. But an emotion really only lasts for 90 seconds. So really what you get when you kind of sit with that is you realize this feeling that I'm carrying for however long is a choice I'm choosing to carry, because the emotion that kind of was the origination of the feeling is long gone. And so for me, when you talk about being intentional, my real intention is how can I bring that feeling as close to that 90 seconds as I possibly can, by keeping wraps on my story, right? By not going back to those childhood limiting beliefs of me not being enough, or nobody wanting to hear me, or I'm not good enough. Like all those little things that played in my inner child's mind, really being aware of that to a point where I can bring compassion and soothe myself in the moment so I don't let the story play out.
Right.
So I wanted to talk about how do you help parents stay in that space when they are triggered. So the child says, I hate you, or the kids are fighting with each other. When they are triggered and you want them to stay in that space where they can still show up with their intention, how do you help them kind of bring the soothing they need in order to be the best version of themselves?
Well, I think in part, what I work with parents on when we begin working together is a meditation practice. So, and breath work, right? So it really does take a concerted effort and practice over time for parents to learn how to respond rather than react. And what that means is to take that moment if you have to, at the beginning, I've worked with parents where they've literally left the room for a minute, if possible, because sometimes it's between siblings and you just can't do that. But if there is the ability to take a moment to just go and take a breath and then come back to the situation, that is what I would strongly suggest. But then the other thing, if kids are old enough to be able to go through an exercise with your child that you're having this altercation with, and this again is a practice, which is to name it for the child. When whatever behavior it is, I feel. So name your feeling. This is not only helping you to become conscious about this, but also to model that for your child. I feel when you, because, and what I want is this 4-part, and it has to, and then the other thing I talk about with parents is making a lot of eye contact. Our children, they feel our energy, right? They know if we're clear with ourselves and we're working towards making a clear connection with them. And they also know if we're distracted with something. They also know when we're really present with them and when we're not. So, I don't think there's a magic button to how do you go from this to this. It's about taking steps to become more aware, intentional, and practice. Knowing how important emotional attunement to yourself is to model for your child.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the clarity in that this is not something you could become aware of and magically, whoop, tomorrow you're like, I've been doing this for years and still put my hands up. There are days when I slip and my kids go, whoop. because I share my intention with how I want to show up. So they call me out when I don't show up the way I want to.
And
but
they do, those kids, they do. They will wave the BS flag all day long if you are not.
best accountability partners ever. But I think the difference is in the beginning, when I slipped, I would beat myself up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In the beginning of this journey, it would be like I would have the internal conversation of better. Like you've learned everything you need to learn, better, you should do better. And I'd have that really harsh conversation with myself. Whereas now I think, how do I want to talk to my kids when they mess up? That's not the conversation I want to have. I don't want to bring a ton of bricks down when you're already feeling low because you've messed up. I want to soothe them and say, you know what, it's okay. Mistakes is where we learn. Figure out what you did wrong and what you want to do differently next time. And so now I have that conversation with myself, and it usually starts with just a rub on the chest, just to say it's okay. Because sometimes there's nobody else that's going to come to you and say, hey, mommy, it's okay.
That's true. I love this. I love this idea.
And this reminds me to take that deep breath. Like before, when I tried to practice 3 deep breaths, like that was just not cutting it for me. It was like, how is this 3 deep breaths working for everybody else?
I learned something from you today. I love this. This is very helpful.
Yeah. Once I put my hand here, it just like instantly I can feel my entire nervous system take a deep breath, and it just calls my body to kind of okay. And that's just that subtle shift, because before, when I was trying to take the deep breath first, I couldn't get it. But I do that as well openly in front of my kids. And so now I see, like, my sons were having a discussion. And one was on a game and he was getting a little riled up, and his brother was going, you're too loud. And he went like this.
I love that.
Yeah, and I think so I think what we need to take away is that in every moment, the ones that we do well and the ones where we mess up, even in those moments, we're modeling. And so what kind of relationship do we want our kids to have with themselves is really the kind of relationship we have to have with us. And I think, especially as moms, we have to remember to bring the student to ourselves first, because we're so busy serving that sometimes we forget to take care of ourselves.
Right. Right. Every moment is an opportunity. And I love that this technique is helpful to you to remember your center, or to remember, where the space that you want to come from for your kids. I mean, that's just a perfect example of that, of being, and again, I think what you mentioned is really important as well, is how we talk to ourselves when we do mess up, when we do, that has everything to do with it. And that we need to talk to ourselves the way we would want to talk to our children or to a friend who had messed up. So, why we have this disconnection between being able to innately go to that with ourselves is interesting, I think.
I think especially as women, we've been schooled in that way for a long time, right? Our value has been based on how well can you serve, right? And how many people can you serve and for how long can you serve? And so service was just where your value was based. And when you weren't serving because you were taking time out for yourself, it was viewed as selfish. To the point where it was heard of. And in fact, I remember Oprah Winfrey talking about the very first guest she had on that talked about the fact that women need to stop and take care of themselves and put themselves at the top of their to-do list. And the entire audience booed her. An entire audience filled with mothers booed her for saying that women need to put themselves first.
But that's
Because
what we're taught.
exactly.
And so it's counterintuitive to think that, but I mean, when I look back at my own 30 some years of parenting, when I take the time to take good care of myself, I am a better mother. So if we know this intellectually, it's about putting it into practice until it becomes innate in us for us to do so. And the big question, or the big thing that I want to say here as well, is what are we showing our children? When we don't take good care of ourselves, we raise another generation of people who don't think they're worthy of being taken care of.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I don't want to do these things, I think to myself, what am I showing my kids here?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I'll tell you what made the shift, because self-love still is very much a journey for me. Because I think I came from such a far left place, right? Like I had to inch my way. But here's what made the big difference. I would say over the last 8 years or so, as we had more global conversations about how women are valued in the workplace, in homes, how we're seen in terms of our creative potential, I took a step back and I said, okay, we're all saying these men need to do better. But where did these men come from? Like, we're not trucking men in from a different planet. We're raising these men.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a step back and I said, I wonder if we're raising men who don't value women because they see mothers who don't value themselves.
Absolutely.
And I became really committed to trying to change the narrative of what my kids see from how I treat myself. Because I have 2 boys and I want men who understand how to value, take care, and protect women because they know their value. And I could only do that if I figure out how to value myself.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I have 4 boys and I've tried to do the same thing with them.
Kim, tell everyone where we can learn more about your work, and how they can kind of dive into your world.
Yes. So my website would be the very first place to go, and that's reallifeparentguide.com. You can get me there. Of course, I'm on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn too. But the best place for me to connect with you is through the website. I write a blog. I do a lot of interviews like this. So I have a number of them on my website that you can even listen to other conversations I've had about other topics related to parenting. And I would love to connect with anyone who wants to.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation and for reminding us all that empowered kids come from empowered parents.
Yes.
Oh, thanks very much for joining us, Kim.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. We're all about sharing and supporting this village. So if you found value in this episode, be sure to share it with your family and friends. And remember, this is a weekly show. So if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that bell icon so that you'll be notified of our next episode. As we always say in the village, you're just one connection away. With love and gratitude, empower us. Until next time.